Jai Hind, Namaste. Today is the concluding talk of the season.
Expert and ex-CSR scientist trained in DRDO labs.
Most people, quite naturally again, are somewhat unaware.
Jai Hind, Namaste. Today is the concluding talk of the season, and we are honored and privileged to have on this momentous Navy Day veteran Vice Admiral Chopra, who has the unique distinction of commanding as the Commander-in-Chief of both the combatant commands of the Indian Navy, that is the Western and the Eastern Naval Command, as well as being the Chief of the Indian Coast Guard for 3 years in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 Mumbai terror attack. At sea, he commanded the Western Fleet, the aircraft carrier INS Virat, the destroyer INS Rajput, and the missile corvette INS Kutar. He was chairman of the Offshore Security Coordination Committee, the National Maritime Search and Rescue Board, the National Oil Spill Disaster Contingency Board, and the patron of the Sea Cadet Corps. He has been a member of the National Security Advisory Board and of the Apex Defense Acquisition Council. Admiral Chopra is a second-generation military officer and is a master's and MPhil in defense studies from Chennai University. Has been a distinguished fellow with a number of think tanks, including the Observer Research Foundation, Gateway House, and the Vivekananda International Foundation. He has been on the governing council of the United Services Institution, the National Maritime Foundation, and of the Mahendra Leadership University, including chairing its core group on his passionate subject of the humanities. He has also been active in India's Track 1.5 and Track 2 dialogues, both at home and abroad. He has traveled extensively the world over and was posted abroad to Europe and the US for over 4 years on several assignments, including a year as senior fellow at the US Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. For his distinguished service, he received Presidential Award Ati Vishishta Seva Medal in 2007 and the Param Vishishta Seva Medal in 2013. Now, I request veteran AVM VSM, moderator of the session, to take the program further. Viewers, AVM Sinha retired in September 2018 from the prestigious Software Development Institute of IAF in Bengaluru, and then worked for 3 years as advisor to BEL. He is a master's from IIT Kanpur and is an active member of our think tank. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, viewers. Greetings of the Navy Day, and thanks, Dr. Deepa. Viewers, she is a competent rational expert and ex-CSR scientist trained in DRDO labs. And as I said, we are today at our concluding talk of this webinar of 5 Talk series, second season, Thus Spake Generals, on the platform of CKS India. One word for CKS India, viewers, that most of you are aware, Center for Knowledge Sovereignty is an established think tank and has been spreading awareness about data sovereignty and cyber security at strategic, political, and national level. CKS is a non-partisan, nationalistic think tank which has been spreading intellectual contents with focus on the spheres of technology, public policy, and research. Coming back to our Thus Spake Generals, the tagline that is based on the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's book, Das Zarathustra. In 1882, Nietzsche propounded his philosophy that an individual in his life cycle has to undergo 3 metamorphoses in order to discover true freedom, and uses allegorical imagery attributes of camel, the lion, the child. Without boring and burdening you all with philosophical canon of Nietzsche, I would like to mention an interesting takeaway of this book, which is very relevant in today's context, geopolitical context. It states, dragon is a great barrier to true spirit of freedom, and lion must take on the dragon to capture the freedom back. Viewers, in circa 2020, dragon has intruded into the Himalayas and is wagging its tail in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific Oceanic region. So need is to awaken the Atmanirbhar Bharat lion to take on the challenges that dragon China poses. We were the great maritime power of ancient era, say 3,000 years back, dominated the waves of ocean named after the mighty peninsular India. Lothal, Dholavira, Muziras, Arikamedu, trading ports of ancient India, are testimonies of our trade ties with Rome, Cambodia, Egypt, and Indonesia. But question arises, will we be able to take on the dragon, or we would require a collective might like Quad or AUKUS? Ladies and gentlemen, It is estimated that by 2030, worth of 40% global trade will pass through sea lanes of communication of Indo-Pacific region. In fact, 80% energy imports of China passes through South China Sea. This region is also rich in minerals deposit, and hence Dragon is tightening its grip around the region. It is encircling through BRI, Jask in Iran, Djibouti, Gwadar, Hambantota, Kakfu in Myanmar, Sihanouk Village, Cambodia. It's taking control all over, all around. And who else can explain this fast evolving Chinese expansionist agenda better than veteran Admiral Anil Chopra on this Navy Day? Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And a very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm delighted to be here this morning to speak to you on behalf of the silent service, which operates out of sight and usually out of the minds of our countrymen. I'm privileged to do so on Navy Day, and especially on the 50th anniversary of the 1971 victory in which the Navy played a major part. As you're all aware, on the 4th of December, small missile boats from the Western Naval Command went and attacked Karachi, going within 12 miles and setting ablaze the fire tanks, the oil tanks, and sinking some ships in a very brave attack. Well, I'm here this morning not just to talk about China, but to talk about India and the Indo-Pacific. You will all agree that's a pretty broad canvas, so I'll be applying the broad brush, and bear with me as I move from one facet to the other. Our species, Homo sapiens, lives and conducts all its affairs on land, and therefore quite naturally, the seas and oceans are distant, unhospitable, and alien environment, with only a very few small percentage of human beings have the experience in their lifetime. In similar fashion, very few people have direct experience of the Navy because it's not easy for the Navy to take people out to sea. And therefore, most people, quite naturally again, are somewhat unaware of the fundamentals, war at sea and the maritime battle space. I will therefore deem it appropriate to begin my talk by underscoring certain facets about the oceans themselves and the navies to give us a backdrop against which we can understand India and its place in the Indo-Pacific a little better. First slide, please. May I have the first slide? Right. Now, if I were to ask the average person how many oceans there are, the answer would be 5 or 6, or some would say 4. But the fact I want to start with is that the ocean is one. It is an interconnected continuum of water. If you are in any one place on the ocean, you're connected to the entire ocean, which covers 70%. This is access to any one part of the ocean gives you access to the whole of it, to all of 70% of the planet. This is something that people don't realize. Second, this ocean is owned by nobody, no country, no corporation. There are no property rights over 70% of this planet, except for the territorial waters of 12 miles from the shore of coastal country. Third, this ocean is free for all, the last great common of humanity, free for navigation, free for exploitation. In fact, it was totally free till the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, which divided it into a few zones, which I'll come to later. And lastly, this ocean, there are no walls, no fences, no borders, no terrain. It's the perfect highway. All applications of sea power flow from the simple fact that the sea is the greatest of all highways. It is much easier to move a ton of anything by water than by any other means. This applies not only to cargo for trade, but also to troops and ammunition and their logistics supply. The seas afford the cheapest means to transport bulk goods. From a military perspective, the sea can either be a barrier to attack or it can be a highway leading our enemies to us. Naval power creates the barrier and naval power exploits the highway. But naval weakness makes the sea, an invitation to attack along the highway. So this is about the ocean itself. Clearly today, maritime trade which accounts for 90% of all global trade, is paramount in the age of globalization and of supply chains. And not only that, now the ocean is, of course, important for increasingly depleted resources on land and for other things like energy through various mechanisms. Now, again, most people don't realize, and this is important for the Indo-Pacific, that 80% approximately of humanity lives within 200 miles of the sea. This area is called the littoral and is the concentrated industry and business activity takes place in the littoral because it gets connected to the rest of the world easily. So we remember this by what we have, the 70-80-90 rule, that the seas cover 70% of the planet, which incidentally is the same percentage of water in your bodies. 80% of humanity lives within 200 miles of the sea, and 90% of global trade is undertaken on. All this has led to increasing contestation of the sea, territorialization as we call it. The United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea in the 80s divided the sea into zones, maritime zones, starting with territorial waters, EEZs, continental shelves, and all that, which I won't go into. Suffice to say, we have sovereign rights only over 12 miles of the territorial zone. We means all countries. The rest is what you call the high seas, which has certain other legalities imposed on them, but they are free for everyone to navigate. China tried to stop that in the South China Sea, is still trying to. So it is in everyone's interest that the freedom of the seas and freedom of navigation is kept as a paramount international tenet of international law. Next slide, please. Okay, before you go on, okay, thank you. This is fine. Little word about the maritime battle space. As you can see in this little slide, it is high-tech, it is multi-dimensional, and it is hugely networked. The Navy has always been fighting in 3 dimensions, on the surface, under the surface, and in the air. And this multi-domain sort of operations we are familiar with. And space and cyber is now just superimposed on these 3 basic dimensions. But what most people, again, don't realize about the maritime battle space is that it is so vast and humongous that it is still not entirely transparent. Even the best geosynchronous satellites cannot identify specific ships on this ocean. And you need a lot of low-level satellites to keep track of various ships. But the most important point about the maritime battle space is, unlike when you fight across borders, international borders, there are neutrals in this battle space. Just because 2 countries start fighting doesn't mean all neutral ships, neutral shipping, people who are not fighting, stop using the sea. So when you're fighting at sea, you have to keep in mind that there are many, many neutral ships. And therefore, location, identification, and targeting is difficult. And that's why we need maritime domain awareness, or MDA, which you must have heard of. The last point, or maybe the second last point about the maritime battle space, and please think Indo-Pacific, is that it cannot be localized. If fighting starts in one sea, it will start in all seas. I'll give you an example. If the Chinese sink a US ship in the South China Sea, nothing stops the Americans then from sinking Chinese ships in the Mediterranean or the Atlantic or the Pacific or the Indian Ocean. You can't restrict, naval warfare to one little patch of sea or one little part of the ocean. This needs to be kept in mind, as I will come to later, because China at the moment does not have the capability to fight in all the ocean. And lastly, because the battle space is so big and naval forces are so mobile, they can travel 1,000 miles a day, that conflicts often take place thousands of miles from the homeland. And therefore you need bases. But there's a lot of confusion about bases. All ships need water, fuel, and food, which they can pick up at a port. But naval bases also need to provide ammunition, missiles, need to repair damage in action. All that is very specialized. And I'll go far as to say that Djibouti, Hambantota, etc. are not bases. They are places. In fact, and this might surprise many people that I say so, that in the Indian Ocean, there are only about 6 bases, and 4 of them are Indian, perhaps Diego Garcia, and perhaps Karachi. There's no other real naval base that can support naval operations and naval warfare. So that's a little bit about the maritime battle space. Now let's get on to navies. Next slide, please. Why navies? In this era of space and cyber and internet and precision-guided missiles and hypersonic missiles, why is everyone building up their navies? Why is America and China, the two most economically strong powers, building up their navies if navies are passé, if war is passé? If these things don't matter, why spend so much money? Navies are expensive business. Why is it that people are spending so much money on the Navy? Well, there are 6 main reasons, and I will go through it quickly. First is the global system that we live in. Our global system is only about 350 years old. The Westphalian International Order, which started in 1648, nation states with borders, defined borders. This has not always been the case in human affairs. This nation state business is only 350 years old. And there is no headmaster, not even the United Nations. The Westphalian Order is anarchic. Might is still right in the global jungle. Beneath the veneer of civilization, force still counts, and force is the final arbiter. And people realize this, despite all their attempts at diplomacy and attempts at peacemaking. People realize that in the final analysis, force is the arbiter. And therefore, Navy, all these nation states maintain expensive militaries. They try through diplomacy to get a balance of power through alliances. They all realize that finally war can only be avoided. At least most people in the strategic community realize that war can only be avoided by strong, hard deterrence. Long ago, an American president said, talk softly, but carry a big stick. And that principle prevails today. Your words will only carry if people know that you have a big stick in hand. Regrettably, that is the state of the international order and of humanity at the present state of evolution. Maybe we will get better, and I'm not being militaristic. I'm just talking realistically about how things pan out in the real world. So forward deployed, potent and professional navies are a major deterrent for preserving the peace and diffusing a crisis. And that's the first reason why all nations who have the money to do so, maintain very strong navies. Second is some attributes about the navies, which I just covered one, but I'll try and explain this because this lies at the heart of why navies. As a consequence of the worldwide freedom of navigation enshrined in international law, naval forces can legally roam the planet at will, unlike ground and air forces, whose deployment is subject to and limited by sovereign borders, foreign territory, and national airspaces. So you have the freedom, legal freedom, to deploy your navy in peacetime anywhere on this planet where it can access. This global access lies at the heart of sea power for those who have acquired the ability to wield it. Naval forces are also very mobile. As I told you, they can cover 1,000 kilometers a day. One day you can be off Bombay, the second day off the Gulf of Oman, the third day off the Gulf of Aden, the fourth day off Sri Lanka. And they travel with their integral logistics. They're self-sustaining. They carry their fuel and water and ammunition all within themselves. These attributes of access, mobility, and sustenance together accord naval forces what we call the reach to apply national power at long distances from home and for extended periods of time, which would otherwise be beyond the sphere of a nation's influence using other components of national and military power. For example, whilst aircraft may be able to fly long distances, globally actually, with air-to-air refueling, they cannot sustain at the point of application of hard power. Once in theater, naval forces can remain on station for as long as required and are able to rapidly adapt to the tempo of operations. They can signal political resolve and act as a force of deterrence or coercion. The ability of naval forces to poise in international waters enables both military and political choice. And leverage. At the strategic leverage level, maritime forces can shape and exploit the battle space and expose the enemy's flank or his rear, like the Makran coast, for example, of Pakistan. At the operational level, these forces can maneuver from the sea to attack, to distract, to disrupt, and even to envelop much larger forces ashore. So that was the second reason why navies, and appropriately so on Navy. Third, the navies address more than threats. Navies don't only address threats, they further and protect national interests and project power, especially economic interests, trade, resources, and they are influential for markets, for developing markets, and for other such things. That is why you have the PLA Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean, mainly for resources and markets. Flag follows trade, and trade follows flag is an important saying, which history has shown is true. To quote Sir Walter Raleigh, who started the navies in general, in one of the chapters, for whosoever commands the sea commands the trade, and whosoever commands the trade of the world commands the riches of the world, and consequently the world itself. So the Navy is intrinsically tied up with trade and for keeping the sea lanes safe and open and promoting our own trade, protecting it, developing it, and influencing other people to create more of it. Fourthly, navies are instruments of state policy. Navies only have, the combat part of the Navy is only one of the roles. It has a constabulary role, it has a diplomatic role, it has a benign role, it has a strategic nuclear role. All these roles can be fused and into state policy as the government desires. The presence of the Navy in international waters makes a big impact even today. If you remember, in the 71 war, appropriately, we are on the 50th anniversary. When the 7th Fleet entered Indian waters, it made a huge impact in the middle of the war. Just the movement of these ships. The world notices movement of ships. And the world, in fact, notices your economic strength and your naval strength, because the rest of it does not concern them. But your economy and your navy can affect any part of the world. Fifthly, and very importantly, land attack. In the old days, navy's cannons could fire to 3 miles, and so could the cannons from land. And therefore, the international waters, if you remember, the territorial waters used to be 3 miles, because that is all the range of the guns used to be. Today, ships can fire at land from 1,000 miles away, cruise missiles, from neutral, international. I don't know whether people realize the implication of this. To attack Hyderabad, Bangalore, Cochin, Chennai, or any of the centers in South India, enemies don't have to cross land borders, national airspaces. They don't have to do that. They just need to have assets out at sea, which can with pinpoint accuracy target inland targets like Bangalore and Hyderabad from the sea. And therefore, land attack has become a very important reason why people are building navies. Last but not least, of course, is the strategic deterrent. The nuclear submarines, the SSBNs, are the most survivable part. The most survivable part of the triad, because the ocean is still opaque and transparent, and nobody knows where the submarines are. So these are the reasons why nations continue to build up their navies and build up their maritime power. Before I move on to the geography now, one last thing about the navies, which please keep in mind. Navies do not defend coastline. Navies, there are no, line up in a line and defend is not the way navies operate. Navies move into the deep ocean, they seek out the enemy, they bring him to battle, and they destroy him as far away from the homeland as possible. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles from the coastline. So in war, navies don't have much to do with coastline. They are instruments of offensive maneuver, mobile, offensive. You cannot use navies defensively. They are basically offensive mechanisms for usage. Next slide, please. Right, so having given you all that background, I think it's now time for me to bring you to our region of the world. And here's the Indian Ocean. the only ocean named after a country, as you're all aware. It spans 4 continents actually: Africa, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica. It has about 30 littoral countries. It is underdeveloped, it is strife-ridden. There is a lot of internecine warfare within this area, in West Asia, in South Asia, in Southeast Asia. It is a landlocked ocean. As you can see, there are very few points of entry, and the northern part of the ocean is completely got the Asian continent, unlike the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. But most importantly, it has become the world's superhighway maritime. A 2/3 of the world's energy shipments, 1/3 of its bulk, and 1/3 of the world's container traffic now crossing these waters. Therefore, India is absolutely central in this ocean, not just geographically, but otherwise. Next slide, please. As you can see now, India dominates this ocean, and it is the only country in this region which has the area, the population, the military to be able to provide stability. Next slide. Indian sea power is critical for maintaining security and stability in this large expanse of water, which is so critical for world economy and global security. And that is why all the world is aligning itself with the Indian Navy, not just through exercises, but through interoperability, so that we can play a part in in providing stability in this part of the world. And Indian sea power is crucial to not only us, but for stability, which in turn is important for any economic progress. Indian sea power, as you know in history, it was there for a while, especially in the southern kingdoms and in Maharashtra. It went out, it had a lot of cultural influence, it even had territorial significance in the Southeast Asia. But like Chinese sea power, it never fully bloomed. And by the 15th century, there was European sea power had dominated everything else, which led to the colonization of Asia, most parts of Asia and Africa. The world history has shown since about the 15th century that the destiny of navies and nations seems to be inextricably linked. Strong navies make for great powers have strong navies. And many nations have realized this, and therefore you have seen the United States first, then China, Russia, Germany, and China all try and make large navies. Now, next slide, please. If India is to rise in the region and anywhere beyond its immediate borders, it would be evident that the Indian Navy has to be strong and influential. Our efforts since independence have been quite good. From scratch, we have built up a 3-dimensional Navy, which operates aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and many other such platforms, and is about the 5th largest Navy in the world in size. But size doesn't count navies, capabilities count more, and we have acquired a very large number of capabilities. We have to deal with traditional Westphalian threats, state to state, but also with non-traditional threats from piracy and terrorism and armed crime, and we are doing that quite well. However, despite the awareness increasing, the naval budget is marginal compared to the general budgets elsewhere, and therefore it is up to the nation to decide finally the priority and the amount of money it would like to spend on the Navy. But our force levels have remained static. They have not increased. They have not reached the levels we had planned for, and only by sustained funding will we be able to develop the Navy to the levels of hard deterrence that we would like it to be. Now, a word about navies on this score. As I told you, navies are very expensive. That has to be understood from the beginning. Countries with no economic might cannot afford large navies. And navies require long lead times to develop. A ship takes a long time to build. A fleet takes longer. So what is required is not just funding, but sustained funding. And that is what we are trying to impress on everyone. And I think we are managing it. Our defense industrial base also requires bucking up, and we are doing that also quite well. But most important, the development of the Navy requires a distant, far vision, and it requires ambition and aspiration on part of the leaders, on part of the people. It is only the people and the leaders who can convert an aspiration into a reality through vision and through political will. The next slide. Okay, now I will go back. I will go finally to the Indo-Pacific, which is a very large area, very maritime construct, spans the two oceans, and it is an area of maritime contestation with many extra-regional navies from France and America and elsewhere, all operating in the region, and with the EU and many others. In the recent past, there is no real hegemon in this region. American power is not so great that its diktat can govern this region. Neither is the Chinese. And therefore, we have a state of multilateralism, which is what every multipolar sort of arrangement, which whilst desirable also leads to its own instabilities and uncertainties. So it's a very uncertain sort of area, and it's very large. In our concept, it extends from the east coast of Africa right up to the west coast of America. And there were 3 or 4 reasons why the Indo-Pacific construct came about. One was because of globalization and trade, as I have mentioned. 2 was, of course, the rise and aggression of China, and that has sort of given rise to various combinations which want to contain Chinese aggressive power in this region. And surprisingly enough, there is very poor linkage between the Pacific and Indian Ocean. And that is a vulnerability for the Chinese, as I will come about later. Next slide, please. As you can see, there are only 3 real straits through which shipping can move between Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and these are all through Indonesia. The Straits of Malacca, the Sunda Strait, and the Lombok Strait. Malacca and Sunda are not very deep. The deeper strait is Lombok, and warships and maybe submarines can move more easily through Lombok than through Malacca. But this is all that controls access into the Indian Ocean from the Pacific or vice versa. And if you want to do anything else, then you have to go all around Australia. And similarly, from the other side, as I show you, either you come through Suez or you have to go all around Africa. So that's the Indo-Pacific. Next slide, please. To get back now to the Indo-Pacific, let's have a look at the main players. I'll start with the Americans. The Americans are a Pacific power. They have real estate in Guam, in various other places, like the French have in the islands of Africa. So they have been a Pacific power ever since Japan was opened up in the 1850s, and have been the dominant power since the Second World War, and have provided for stability and security in this region, which has allowed Southeast Asian economies to bloom, and with an economic bloom which came out of many decades of stability. However, American commitment to this region is now questionable. We are all aware of the deep domestic divides in America, of their withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the commitment and even competence of the United States in this region is being called to question. Along with that, we see a fatigue in the US, fatigue, and they're sort of withdrawing into isolationism again, though they keep making all the proper noises, and it may well be that the American system delivers and keeps sustained power in this region. But we'll have to see how the Biden administration follows up on its talk. And there seems to be, the public seems to have the appetite for getting involved in foreign conflicts. So the Americans are therefore, is a question mark. The same with China. Despite all the China narrative of being the largest and strongest power by 2049, China has big problem and is vulnerable to a very large degree, as I will try and highlight. Undoubtedly, the Chinese Navy has become the largest Navy in no time at all, but it has very little combat experience, and it has the worst maritime geography in perhaps the world. Next slide. This slide shows you how hemmed in China is in the maritime sphere. The Chinese can operate in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, but to get out into the Pacific, they have to pass through the first island chain, and to get into the Indian Ocean, they have to go through the Asian Strait. So they are dominant in the China Seas, but elsewhere they have a problem despite the big Navy, and they haven't fought a war at sea at all, not since the 17th, 18th century with the Koreans. Minor skirmish with Vietnam is all that they've had. They have very few allies outside of a few, and they have very few bases. They're trying to develop, but they've still got, as I said, places, not bases. And they have this Malacca dilemma, where much of their oil and energy comes through Malacca. And despite all the oil pipelines in the world, and despite all the Arctic routes, the bulk of their energy will have to come by ship through the Malacca Straits. That makes it vulnerable. Next slide, please. To come back to the Indo-Pacific, it's not only the US and China. There is Japan, there is Australia, there is France, there is Russia, there is the UK, there is EU, and of course there is India. And these are all middle major powers with considerable capability and capability to align themselves with each other and capability to push back against any sort of situation which may develop in the economic or other spheres. So India, of course, shares a land border with China, unlike many of the others, but it has stood up to China both last year in the Himalayas and Doklam by not joining the BRI, by not joining the RCEP. All these are strong actions and commendable actions on the part of India to show that it will, whilst trying to keep good relations with China, it is not likely to cave in, and that has changed India's strategic stance over the last 2 years. Like every other power, we have to do a little bit of hedging because neither the American nor the Chinese trajectory is clear. The trajectories are unclear. And this has led to a lot of uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific. China faces a CCP Congress. It might have leadership issues. It might have social issues. It might have economic issues. It has very little soft power. There's a lot of pushback from even the smaller countries now who are caught in debt traps. It has a bad image. No one is crossing the seas to get into China. There are no desperate immigrants trying to get into China. It doesn't draw. There is no draw. And therefore, China has a problem. And like I said, it has a very big military machine. How well it can use it is a question mark. So therefore, if you notice, those of you who've looked at the Indo-Pacific, that loyalties are changing all the time. Alignments are changing. Commitments are changing. Everyone is hedging. No one is sure who's going to fight, whose battle. And in all this, the Indo-Pacific, all we can do is build up capacity and capability. As a good saying goes, don't worry about intentions, worry about capability. And therefore, we have seen first the Quad and then now the AUKUS coming into play. And those are basically a pushback against Chinese dominance of the region. I shall be concluding now with just highlighting the few hotspots. Taiwan, clearly. West Asia, clearly. India, China, clearly. The border. The India-China border, as we all know, there's a dangerous standoff. We have limited offensive capability, but at sea, we have offensive capability. And China is vulnerable. China knows it, and that's why it will keep the land frontier alive. By doing so, they take our focus away from the sea, our focus and funding. And they have been successful. In the last 2 years, they have taken India's focus away from the sea and back to the land. They would rather contest on land where they are strong than contest at sea where they are vulnerable. This is grand strategy and it is effective. And I hope we don't get taken by it because unless we can challenge them at sea, we cannot moderate their behavior on the northern border. So I will end by saying India has great opportunity, but no amount of words can make this opportunity. It requires political will, it requires funding, it requires vision. Much of that is there. There are hurdles, but I'm sure that we will be able to overcome that. And one of the reasons I spoke today was the general populace. General populace must be aware of some of these strategic issues, of this business of China trying to veer us away back to the land border. And we need to develop an offensive mindset. We need to develop offensive mindset. You cannot defend without offensive. And you need an offensive mindset to be able to develop, to defend India. And the Navy is all about offensive mind. Thank you very much. Next slide. I have finished. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for this enlightening talk on this Navy Day, making all the general populace aware that why Navy is required. Strong Navy makes strong, and we need to develop offensive mindset. Force is the final arbiter, and we pray let the force remain with India. So I will take questions which have, first of all, this is the question from my side, sir. Is it the time to shed our aversion of military alliances and build alliances specific to Indo-Pacific region, say with Japan, Indonesia, Vietnam?
Well, I think it was George Washington who said that all alliances are entangling. And his advice to all his successors, all the presidents of the United States, was do not get involved in entangling alliances which restrict your freedom of choice. So I think India has wisely chosen to be strategically autonomous to the degree possible. We have alignments, not alliances. And if you were to ask me, I think alignments are a better deal than alliances. In alliances, your freedom of choice gets limited. We have good alliances, we have good military cooperation without being in alliances. We are interoperable with a lot of navies. We exercise with a lot of navies. We keep increasing the level of interoperability. And this is a fleet in being, which the adversary has to consider, because if navies can operate together, they can fight together also, if the need arises, if they're interoperable enough, but without being in a necessary enough formula.
So alignment is the answer, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, one very innocent question from our our regular viewer, Madam Sangeeta. She's asking, and she's very much worried. She's asking, are the navies not getting its share of budget? We hear government spending much on the defense forces, the funding.
India's defense spending is around 2% of its GDP, which is not very high compared to the rest of China. We spend on defense far less than many of the other powers do. And out of what we spend on defense, the Navy only gets about 15% of the budget because it is one smaller, but it is very capital intensive, like I told you, and it takes a long time to build. And slowly we have been trying in the Navy, all of us, my predecessors, successors, trying to educate the government, the politicians, the bureaucracy, the general populace, that it's your Navy, it's not my Navy. You want a Navy, you have to fund it. It's not our Navy. We're not a corporation. This is India's Navy. This is your Navy. The government and the people of India have to decide how much money they.
Sir, another question from our regular viewer, Mr. Dharamveer ji. He is posing a question on this Navy Day, sir. He's asking on capability of the Navy. He is saying that, are we prepared to take on the China along with Pakistan, because China is propping up Pakistan, and are we capable to take in this Indian Oceanic region, sir?
Like I tried to say in my talk, the Navy is providing effective deterrence at sea. If you want, as the saying goes again, if you want peace, you have to be strong. If you're weak, you're inviting war. So the whole, some people ask me, what is the role of the armed forces? And people expected me to say first to fight wars. But I think the first role of the armed forces is to prevent war, to provide deterrence, to prevent war. And only if war is necessary, then to fight and win the war. So Indian Navy today is not as strong as I would like it to be, or many of them in the Navy would. It's certainly not. We had expected it to have higher force levels, but it is still a deterrent force. But what we have to say, I pointed out to you some of the vulnerabilities of China, but they are only vulnerabilities if we can exploit the vulnerability. If we don't have the strength to exploit the vulnerabilities, then they don't remain vulnerable. So, as I said, navies take a long time to build across many governments, and it requires sustained funding and sustained political will, irrespective of the political party. And I hope that message will go across to the people of India and to its leaders.
Sir, another question he's asking, this is in view of the recent hypersonic weapon experimented by China. Will it alter the maritime battle space?
I think it's too early to say. It's too early to say. Even the Americans are assessing it. You know, the Chinese have a great They have developed the art of the narrative to perfection. They say something, one thing, and about 1,000 newspapers, magazines, think tanks, and analysts, commentators will all analyze it next morning without giving it adequate thought. So we have a knee-jerk society around the world. Our social media causes us to react instead of responding. And I think it's too early to say. It could be, it may not be. I would not venture a guess here.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for that crisp answer. Sir, this is again a query or make us understand, sir. You said that all these ports from Just to Djibouti to all these places, they are just ports, simple ports. They are not bases. And so it is not going to help China, sir, in any way when contestation take place in this constricted area of Indian Ocean?
I'm very happy you asked me this question because I didn't have enough time to go into it in length. As I said, what is a base? What is an army base, for example, or an air force? The first requirement of a base is that it must be secure. You must be able to defend your base. If you can't defend your base, it is not a base. Now tell me, in Djibouti, can the Chinese defeat Djibouti? There's an American base next to it. There's a French base next to it. There's a Japanese base next to it. In peacetime, it's a good place to get fuel
and
water, recreation, food. It's a good place for a ship to do R&R, recover, and go back. In hostilities, such a base will be taken out within the first 15 minutes. So a base is not something which you can just put some facilities and say that this is my base. Your first requirement of a base is that the ships or aircraft or army units which are there in a base feel secure in the base. That the base itself cannot be attacked very. Hambantota, for example, in the rule of international maritime warfare, if a neutral country offers its facilities to one of the belligerents, it becomes party to the conflict. So I'm giving an example. I'm not saying of any country in the vicinity of India. If it offers its facilities to, say, India's adversary in combat, in conflict, then India has within rights to attack that country by international law. So these are not bases. The only place where the Chinese could have a base in the Indian Ocean is Karachi, because the Chinese have sold the same ships and submarines that they are using to Pakistan. And therefore, Pakistan has developed the repair facilities and maintenance facilities for these ships and submarines in Karachi. And therefore, Chinese ships of the same type can avail of these facilities. And a naval base, as I told you, first and foremost requires repair and maintenance facilities. An average naval ship has got 400 to 500 technical systems on board, from guns, radars, engines, all sorts of things. And they need to be repaired and maintained. So unless a base has all those facilities and action damage, if you get a hole in the side of your ship, you come back to a waste to repair it. You can't do it in a normal place. You need a base. And you need ammunition ordnance depots in a base for you to be able to resupply all the ammunition that you have spent. So now it is for you to judge yourself whether these places are bases or places.
So thanks, sir. It was a really interesting, informative, and enlightening talks from bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Now I request Dr. Nagaratna, the legal eagle of CKS India. She is an associate professor of law, chief coordinator of Advanced Center of Research Development and Training in Cyber Laws Forensic at National Law School of India, University, Bangalore, to propose a vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. A very good morning to one and all, and a very happy Navy Day. As always, I deem it my privilege to render this heartfelt note of gratitude and note of thanks. I, on behalf of Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, extend our deep sense of gratitude and thanks to our esteemed speaker of today's virtual event, Vice ADM Anil Chopra, sir, for delivering the most valuable talk on India and the Indo-Pacific. Sir, your talk was very informative, helping us understand the strengths as well as the concerns we have with our placing in the Indo-Pacific. The forts, the capabilities we have, the challenges we've been encountering in this domain, the interrelationship between countries that are of specific concern in relation to Indo-Pacific. So most importantly, today's talk was very apt and helped us, including the general populace, in realizing the immense contribution of our Navy in making our nation a stronger one and in safeguarding us and our country. As you've rightly remarked, if you want peace, you need to be strong. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us about this whole aspect of India and Indo-Pacific in general, and for specifically enlightening also us on the potential our nation's Navy has and about India's sea power. Hearing from you on this day, on this extremely important aspect, indeed, there could not have been a better way of celebrating virtually, especially this day that marks the celebration of the immense role played by our Navy and the achievements of our proud nation and our proud Navy. Thank you so much, sir. I also thank our esteemed participants, both present here on the Zoom platform as well as on other social media platform, for making this event a very meaningful one by your participation. I also thank our CKS team for organizing this talk, including Shri Vineet Goenka sir for planning the event, Shri Pranay Sinha sir for contributing majorly to the execution of this events plan and anchoring the event. Special thanks to my dear friend, Ms. Deepa, for delivering introduction speech. Thanks to Mrs. Sumitra Goenka ma'am for again coordinating for organizing this event. And thanks to Paresh for making all logistic arrangements in organizing this event. Thanks to each one of you once again for making this day and the event a meaningful one. To one and all, with the kind permission of this speaker and all the participants, I request to close the call. Jai Hind.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Jain.